On August 3, 1993, Mark and Kelly Strong, both 33, and their 4 children, ages 2 to 8, were traveling from Seattle, Washington to Anaheim, Alaska, in their van. They stopped at the Maaden Junction in British Columbia around 10 p.m. to take a break before continuing their lengthy journey. They fell asleep but were woken up to a nightmare from real life. "I can't believe I'm sitting here giving you this nightmare. I know you won't believe me, and I don't care." This is a story Mark told the authorities on August 5th. But that's what happened. I had always wanted to live in Alaska since I was a child, and I had a good job up there. Everyone was looking forward to the new adventure we were about to go on, but as the late afternoon drew near, we debated whether or not to stop and find a hotel for the night. However, I decided to continue so we could reach Anchorage sooner, and we pulled off into the junction at around 10 o'clock in the evening. Because I needed some sleep because I couldn't stand to be awake any longer. It began when I was startled awake by something. "Where is Mikey?" When I asked my wife, I sighed and noticed that he was not in his car seat. I checked my watch and saw that we had been sleeping for about 2 hours. Kelly said, "He's probably just under the seat," and she climbed into the back to find him. A few seconds later, I heard Kelly yell, "Mark, help me!" and she was outside hammering on my window, telling me to let me in. Let me tell you that she left when her words were cut short. "What the hell is happening?" I exclaimed out loud as panic swept through me. I was going to run outside to find Kelly when I felt like something was wrapped around me, and I was lying on the ground for a while before I regained my composure. I got up and looked around to see if I could tell where I was. I knew I was in a forest, and a few hundred yards ahead of me was what looked like light. My thoughts then turned to my family. As I approached the light, I heard one of my children yell, "Daddy, help me, it's got me." It sounded like my little Rachel, so I quickened my pace. When I reached the top of a small hill, I could see our van with its doors still closed and could see that the light was coming from the gas station where we were parked. Then I noticed something up and off to the right before it crested the hill and disappeared into darkness. I was in such a panic that I didn't even consider using the payphone to call the authorities. Instead, I just ran towards the hill where I had seen the thing carrying Rachel. When I reached the top, I stopped and saw that the forest was dark and thick. I admit that I was afraid as I stood there. I ran down to the car to check on my other children and saw through the window that Mikey and Rachel were gone, but the other 2 were still there. As I frantically called out for Rachel, I began to move through the trees, even though I was peering into the darkness. "Where are you, Rachel?" I stopped to listen for her response, but all I could hear was silence. I wasn't even sure where I was going, so I would walk a short distance and shout her name, but she never answered. Now and then I would glance back to see if the gas station's light was still visible through the trees, because I knew that if I got lost in the forest, I would be in a world of pain. I probably kept searching for another half hour before deciding to go back and see how my other 2 girls were doing. When I reached the top of the hill overlooking the petrol station, Charlotte and Sophie's dense fog began to drift in, making it difficult for me to see the van as I got closer. As I opened the sliding door and entered, Charlotte and Sophie screamed, "Daddy, what's going on? Where's Mommy?" asking Sophie. "I don't know, sweetheart. Some took her with Mikey and Rachel. I tried to find her, but the forest is too far away." Dense and gloomy, when I got to the payphone that was attached to the building, I noticed that the cord had been torn out and was hanging there. "Damn it," I said aloud as I slammed the door. I said, "I'm going to try calling the police from the payphone over there. You girls wait here and don't get out." They said nothing and simply nodded their heads as I sobbed quietly. The fog was getting really thick now, and if it weren't for the one bright light on the gas station, I might not have been able to walk 5 hours. I heard what sounded like the pitter-patter of bare feet running across the asphalt as I turned to head back to the van. "Who's there?" I said in a terrified tone, scared out of my mind. As I was heading back, I couldn't see the van, but I knew it wasn't too far from where I was. When I reached it and reached for the door, I heard something running at me from behind. Before I could turn around to see what it was, I was hit so hard that I was knocked out, falling to the ground 10 feet away. I was staring up at the stars when I woke up and opened my eyes, but something was amiss. It took me a minute to realize what it was, but something about the air and the color of everything was different. Our vehicle, which should have been turquoise blue, was now dull gray. I thought I might have struck my head too hard, so I closed my eyes, but when I opened them, the van was still gray. As I slowly got to my feet, I noticed that the fog had also dissipated. Looking around, it appeared that everything had turned the same drab gray hue. I whispered to myself, "What's going on?" This can't be real. My mind immediately returned to my girls, who should still be in the van, so I ran up to the window and looked inside. I cried out as I pounded my fist, but the van was empty. I turned around and screamed out, "Charlotte Sophie, where are you?" However, I noticed that my voice was unconcerned. It seemed as though everything was silent, and I wasn't even sure if I was speaking aloud or if it was all in my head. "Daddy, help us," responded once more. The strangest thing happened. Instead of standing there doing nothing, I started running around the area to see if I could find them. When I got to the back of the gas station, I saw something in my peripheral vision that made me stop right away. I swear to God, I saw a set of red eyes looking at me from the forest, but when I turned to look directly at them, I couldn't tell where her voice was coming from. They weren't there, so I thought, this can't be real. I kept running until I returned to the van to see if the girls were there, but they weren't. I closed my eyes and began crying because I was mentally exhausted. When I opened my eyes, I noticed something inside the van that might have jumped back there, glaring at me from inside. It looked like a man of some kind, but his mouth and eyes were sideways. "Hey!" I yelled as I ran around. I hurried to the sliding door and opened it. Aside from the items we had brought, the van was empty. I got inside, sat down, and shut the door while staring at Mikey's car seat. I couldn't believe this was all happening. Where was my family? I told myself that I felt as though my soul had been torn from me. It was an emptiness that words cannot describe. Suddenly, the van began to shake violently, and something smashed the windshield. I grabbed the passenger seat in front of me and hung on because everything inside was going. Flung about, something smacked the window to my left as I was about to open the sliding door and get out, and my hand on the handle was frozen in place as I began to tremble. I debated whether or not to turn around to see what it was, but I could hear its loud breathing against the window, so I slowly turned around and caught a glimpse of it. I remember something hard hitting me in the face that broke my nose, but everything stopped suddenly, and everything was calm as if it had never happened. I'm positive it was the same thing I'd seen inside the van when it swiftly took off, so I locked all the doors right away, but I reasoned that wouldn't help much because I was positive I wasn't dealing with anything common. I didn't care though, because it was all I could think about at the time, and my search for my family had devolved into self-preservation. I was soaked in perspiration as I sat there scanning my surroundings in anticipation of the man-like creature returning, but all of a sudden, just like previously, it seemed like something was encircled me once more in an instant. I was lying down in the middle of the forest, but this time I jumped up totally expecting it to be there. It was still dark, but I could see that the first light was approaching, so I decided to sit down and wait until I could see well enough to get my bearings before deciding what to do. About half an hour later, when I could see well enough, I decided to head east and take my chances that I would run into the highway after walking all day. A large lake I now call Maaden Lake. After spending the night there, I walked around the lake the following morning until I reached the highway and found a ride to return to the intersection. When Mark got back to the intersection, Canadian police were already there, and the search had already started to locate them. A day later, he was arrested and questioned. About 20 miles from the intersection, Kelly was discovered by some hunters roaming through the forest. Her account was identical to Mark's in that she believed something had. The police called in several members of the Encot tribe who had dogs to help with the search for the missing children throughout the following few weeks. They discovered the mutilated bodies of the 4 children, each of whom was 5 miles apart and when pinned on a map, formed a perfect square. 1 week after the children's bodies were discovered, one of the natives, Billy Gunnan, 66, who dated in the area, was discovered by the police. Look for the kids arrived at the station where Mark was being held and requested to talk with him. He was granted permission to do so, and their exchange was captured on tape. When Mark had concluded his story, Billy begged him to tell him what had happened. According to Billy, what you experienced is what my people refer to as Ajar, a malevolent child-thieving shapeshifter that can move between its realm and ours. When it is in its human shape, its eyes and lips appear sideways, giving the impression that you entered its realm and returned as a child. I've heard terrifying tales of my people being sent to their realm and never returning, yet for some reason, Mark and Kelly were detained for more than 2 months on suspicion of killing their children. However, there was never any concrete proof that they did it, so they were finally freed. Since moving to Anchorage, Mark and Kelly have led a peaceful existence and refused to discuss what happened with anyone. If you want to read more terrifying horror stories, then subscribe.